Any questions for our panel? And what do you think of that? I'll start off. Because we talked about old companies now and trying to suspend our own beliefs and put ourselves in the shoes of corporate executives. If that corporate executive is of a company that's only 5 years old, or 10 years, how are we to convince them that they have a history worth preserving? At the center, we call this the Spotify challenge. They're 10 years, they're 11 years now, and we're trying to convince them that they have a history to preserve. Any thoughts on that? Tim? Torkel? Yeah.
Sure. I would suggest that he has some expectancy of staying in business for some decades to come. So he needs to address this at a very early stage. We have exactly this problem with the oil and gas business, which is relatively new. It goes back 30, 40 years ago. So, but of course, they all have the intention of staying in the business for some time, which is a good reason enough.
Tim?
So I would probably observe that in our experience, it may not be exactly at 10 years, but probably at 25 or so years that companies begin to start to ponder this issue. And if you will recall from one of my slides, one of the reasons they do so is they enter into that period of succession management, where there's a prospective leadership change. And then the leaders often acknowledge that there are cultural and character issues about the founding of their firm and those factors that gave rise to this great enterprise that need to be captured, preserved, and carried forward into a new generation. So that's one of the opportunities, I think, actually for an oral history program to unlock that knowledge and ensure that there is an archival program to support it going forward. And in today's age, of course, largely digitally born material.
Yep.
Even though I told you that the Japanese archives business archives in 20th century was very inactive, sort of, but still they produce to document their history for a long time. We have more than 16,000 chassis corporate history, volumes of histories. Many companies compiled and published it. And many companies which is more than 100 years old, they produced many times in their life. And we think that in order to be enduring company or sustainable company, in order to make the business successful, you have to keep your document and you have to keep your records. And I got some of the archivists in Japanese companies, they stress that to document the experience of failure is very important. So even though so we can find some very unsuccessful projects or some successful business in their company history. So I am going to use this kind of example to persuade that new company to keep their records and artifacts.
Lovely. Questions from the audience? I'll throw in another one. We heard earlier about the black hole. There's a different black hole that we sometimes talk about, which is the digital black hole. The past 15 years, since the arrival of email and PowerPoint instead of project plans, intranets instead of employee magazines, although there is an abundance of digital material, it's not preserved. Have you come across this digital lack of information in your work? How difficult is it to preserve digital information compared to the analog or physical?
Well, dealing with a relatively new business, if we do not work with the digital material, we don't have anything to do, actually. It's but for us, it's been important not to impose too difficult approaches, but to make it as simple as possible. Just to give you an example, for the National Archives in Norway, on the whole, when they try to preserve digital databases, for example, They have a very complicated system of taking in all the various tablets and stuff and documenting it technically and everything. We try to do it the other way. We ask the business, how simply can you do it and still make it possible to save at least part of it? So for example, instead of taking very complicated databases, we ask, what are the reports, standard reports that you have within the system that can produce maybe 60, 70, 80% of the information, and still have it very authentic in many ways and simple to handle. So that's kind of our approach, and we've taken in quite a lot of systems with that kind of an approach. Easy, it's just like taking out a drawer and you build on the systems that they have and take out simple formats and that are sustainable and robust.
And you take that as digital information or physical?
Digital.
Digital, yep. Thoughts, Tim?
I'd just say the organizational principles are largely the same, but coming back to this notion of digital clutter, I'm mindful of pictures being taken. 20 years ago, an event might have had 20 images. Today, there are thousands of images. And if one doesn't have a core organizational and governing principle to them, you drown in that data, and it becomes useless as a consequence. So it's critically important to apply those sorts of disciplines digitally as well as physically. And we often confront, again, at C-suite level, this mistaken notion that if you have a digital record of something, you no longer need the physical. It's nonsense. When you see the evolution of technology, I can tell you now, as I'm sure in many of your collections, we have VHS, we have all of these earlier technologies that are now obsolete and at risk of being lost if they're not carefully preserved and replicated.
Past maybe 20 years, it's getting very difficult to compile again business history in Japan because of this digital state. Companies, they are very difficult to, they don't know how to keep or migrate the records and digital records for long, or maybe 10 years or 15 years, from past 10 years to 15 years. So we are trying to, to understand how to keep the records, digitally and migrate safely. So this is what we are, talking about right now.
Lovely.
Thank you.
Thank you. One question in the back.
Good morning, friends. It's myself, Dr. Meena Gautam. I've been at the National Archives of India. So far as business archives in India is concerned, we have a Companies Act, and that do regulate the companies that how long can they keep their records, and of course passing on records for archiving is a big issue from the historical perspective. So of course we don't have any uniform organization or a council, business council in India to regulate all the business houses in the country. But I would like to know from Yuko regarding Japan, if you have some rules and regulations or an act like that, which can help the companies at least to know what to keep and what not to keep, and for how long.
Well, we only have the no record or legislation on business archives or corporate archives. We only have some, very general law about, PL and BS or things like that. That's it. So this is the state of Japanese, the legislation of on Japanese archives now, or Japanese business records and archives now.
Which opens up for a whole continued discussion over the break about what roles and what regulation can the state put on businesses. I'll leave you to talk about that over the break. We take a 10-minute break, but first, thank you to our panelists.